welcome everybody today. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We're honored that you're choosing to join us today. My name's Scott Cuthbert from Safepedia, and our mission is to support and uplift safety leaders with the knowledge, resources, and community they need to help make their workplaces safer. Before we get started today, I just wanted to thank you for all the hard work that you do. A lot of it happens behind the scenes, but impacts are felt with our families, our communities, and our organizations. And we want to thank you again for the work that you do every day. At the bottom of the screen, under the three dots, you'll find the Q&A section. So please submit any of your questions at any point throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to make sure that we get to all of those questions at the end of the webinar. So today is Working Together Turnaround Maintenance in Refineries. The webinar has been made possible with the support of 3M, a preferred manufacturer member of the AD Safety Network, and a longtime supporter and friend of Safepedia. So thank you so much to 3M. Our presenters today are Felipe and Stephen from 3M, and they're going to dive into the critical fall protection and confined space challenges unique did I get that right or wrong on the turnaround and maintenance refineries? I felt like I'm reading last webinar's description.
No, you're right.
All right. Yeah. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Felipe, and he's going to dive into today's webinar.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. So before we start our webinar today, I just want to go through our general statements. If you can take a minute just to read through the general statements, we can start our webinar. So today, the facilitators will be myself, Felipe Souza. I'm the segment marketing manager for oil and gas for 3M. And we have Stephen Kosh, which is our 3M global application engineer, which we'll talk a little bit about the challenges that we have with turnaround maintenance. But before going to the turnaround by itself, I want to reinforce how 3M approach safety. So at 3M, we bring together different areas from an end user perspective. We are extremely concerned about hazard awareness, industry experience, regulatory, education, and innovative technologies. But the key idea here is to work together. We, 3M, because PP doesn't exist in isolation, real safety comes from the right products, working together in real world environments. So that's what we call the science of safety, and it's also a foundation for our integrity protection program, which will come back later. So those are some of the responses that we hear from our end users when we talk about PPE. Oh, it's too heavy. It's uncomfortable. I can't see properly. It's hard to breathe. I can't communicate. And this is extremely important because complaints about safety most of the times are buried for compliance. If PPE doesn't fit well, is uncomfortable, or make the job harder, workers are less likely to wear it consistently. And what 3M focus on is to increase the wear time of PPEs. So potential reasons for workers may not wear a PPE. As I mentioned before, discomfort, performance, compatibility, communication, fit, it's too hot, or fogging eyewear. All PPE worn doesn't work well together. So basically what this causes is an increase of exposure to hazards. And that's what we want to prevent. We at 3M, we want to help improve worker health, and safety workers must wear PPE all the times while you're exposed to hazards. So PPE is not effective when worn properly. It's most effective when worn properly. So we want the end user to use PPE 100% of the time when exposed to hazard. So required by many regulations and assumed it's a protection factor calculation. I'm not going to through the calculations right here, but as I mentioned before, what we can do to make our end user to use or to warm PPE 100% of the time. And that's where it comes our integrated protection program. So the integrated protection product is not just a set of products, it's a portfolio of PPE technologies and services that work together. So it addresses key worker needs, comfort, fit, compatibility, communication, performance, and it's more than the sum of its parts. So we are not solving in silos, we are solving across the worker experience. So when we talk about integrated protection, we need to talk about the specific areas. So communication, compatibility, comfort, fit, performance, so we can increase our wear time. So when we talk about communications, so we need to be fully aware that communicating clearly while wearing hearing or respiratory protection can be challenging. So if workers remove PPE to speak, protection may be compromised. So we want better solutions so the communication could be better when using specific PPEs. And then we move to compatibility. So if you use incompatible products, workers need to wear multiple types of PPE for long periods of time, which may interfere um, in each other when worn together. So what we want to have is that all 3M PPE products have the best compatibility, the best comfort to be used by our end users. Comfortable for all day wear. So we want you guys to use comfortable PPEs and something that you can stay for a long period of time without compromising your day-to-day activities or even exposure you to hazards. It needs to fit properly for both comfort and protection, and the performance needs to be the best as possible. Now that's now that we've established the importance of wear time and the integrated protection, let's apply that thinking to one of the most critical and high risk events in our industry. So let's jump a little bit about the oil and gas downstream and chemical segments. So those are the two main segments that we have that we're going to focus today. Okay, a refinery basically is essentially a facility that takes crude oil and turns into hydrocarbons or converts them into finished products. So gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, asphalt, liquid petroleum. You know these more than anybody else. And when we talk specifically about the downstream for oil and gas, this is a huge market with different variances, with different people or end users involved in this process. So some drivers and trends affecting these industries, basically we have supply chain challenges, economic uncertainty, sustainability, regulations, workforce training, asset portfolio diversification. And that's what 3M is trying to support our end users throughout those different drivers and trends to make the process of using a PPE or the methodology of using a PPE clear to everybody in the field. So one of the methodologies, and I'm not going to the sales process here by itself, that's how 3M approaches different segments. We try to understand the industry, the application, what kind of job you do, what hazards are you exposed to, and with that, we can bring the proper solutions to mitigate those hazards on your day-to-day activities. And I just want to share one of our videos here before turning the presentation to Stephen. So what is a turnaround and how it could affect our daily activities?
My name is Paul Fisher. I'm a turnaround manager at Scott for Manufacturing. I'm standing here in front of our hydrocracker units. Refinery is currently down for turnaround. What turnaround means is we shut down our plant and isolate the equipment and make it safe, and then clean it, inspect it, and do the repairs necessary to restore the equipment to a safe operating condition for the next 4 years. So we have over 1,500 workers on site: boilermakers, pipe fitters, welders, scaffolders, insulators, so on, electricians, all participating in this. Turnaround will last about 5 to 6 weeks. So turnarounds are a big event for us. Normally at Scott for Manufacturing, we have 300 shell employees and 500 including our contractors. So when we do these events and we get to more than 1,500 people on site, a lot of work involved in setting up facilities and providing the employees a good, clean, safe, and great place to work. So that work actually happened May, June, July, August. We spent several months setting up for this event and preparing the operations group and the maintenance group to do the activities.
So with that in mind, let's start by setting the stage. What is turnaround maintenance? So a turnaround basically is a plant shutdown, as we saw at the video, with a lot of people involved. And these turnarounds could take a couple of weeks or several months. So for specific industries, you can do the turnarounds 2 or 4 times a year. Everything depends. But what is the most important here is that 3M it's want to have an active role in this turnaround activities, so we can be providing the proper solution for the end user. So now I want to turn the presentation to Stephen to talk a little bit about the applications and hazards.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Kosh. Just a quick introduction for myself and to clarify something as well. I think in the introduction slide it said I'm an application engineer. First of all, I am not an engineer. Those people go through a lot of training and testing to do that. I'm referred to, I work within the group that we call the group application engineering. And what does that mean? And this is, I think, one of the things that as a customer of 3M that you need to be aware of is that we have individuals like myself that have worked in industry. And I know it's been quite a few years ago, 29 years ago, 30 years ago, I was actually a battalion fire chief and safety specialist at an oil refinery, responsible for a lot of things, especially turnaround activities and confined space and high-level rescue. But there's a lot of us around and that help out and understand our products better or understand segments a little bit better because of the work that we've done historically or the things that we've spent a lot of time in education on. I do have a master's degree in safety and health. I actually was a safety and health manager for 3M, one of our chemical plants. So I've been through turnarounds quite a bit, almost 14 years of my career, 30 years or so out there. I've been spending Memorial Day weekend away from family and friends and spending my whole entire time during that time frame during the turnarounds at our chemical plant. Just another quick little note, I sit on the NFPA committee for confined space, NFPA 350 and ANSI Z117. So we'll talk a little bit more about key turnaround activities. And again, we're not going to get into a lot of detail on all of this stuff. I wish we would. We're going to cover some of the things high level. Some of this you're already aware of. But again, things that we can maybe bring up or things that we can talk about in a little bit more detail later if you want to reach out to us. So next slide, Felipe. So I think many of you already know this, but turnarounds are statistically the most dangerous period in any type of refinery or chemical plant's operational cycle. With the combination of your individual workforce, but then the hundreds, if not thousands of contractors that are brought onto the site, creates challenges for everyone. Many of those contractors are not very familiar with your activities. You have processes that are on normal operations as well. So you have a portion of your facility that's down while some of it's still operational. So again, trying to manage those challenges of keeping people safe while managing and continuing operations as well. And then there's a lot of unique activities that are taking place during the turnaround that, again, creates super duper challenges. We have a lot more people working at heights on scaffolding, a lot more scaffolding being built in, large cranes, and potentially entering IDLH conditions for catalyst change and things like that that's happening within reactor vessels and that. So lots of stuff. So we're going to touch base in the next few slides here. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of the safety and health challenges, or some of the, and again, trying to introduce some of the PPE that potentially could benefit you during line breaking, surface preparations, welding and grinding, scaffolding, aerial work platform, and then confined spaces. Next slide. All right, so due to the hazards, protecting workers during turnarounds requires the use of a lot of PPE. As I mentioned, refinery turnaround concentrates more hazards in one place and in one time frame than any other work environment during a normal operations. There are a number of chemicals that workers can be exposed to, and some can be immediately life-threatening. Having appropriate gas detection and appropriate respirator is going to be critical. Properly fitted, inspected harness with 100% tie-off is important for all workers being working at height and things that are being done at height. And fall protection for tools, which again, sometimes we generally forget about, are important because hard hats themselves are required during a work activity like this. However, what about those dropped objects? Okay, a wrench, a simple 15-inch spanner wrench, or a crescent wrench dropping from even 10 feet can have upwards of 200 pounds of force hitting the ground. So again, lots of energy being potentially hitting somebody down below, which a hard hat may not totally protect. So again, protecting those objects from falling as well. You have a lot of welding and grinding that's taking place, high pressure testing, electrical work. You know, we've got a lot of activities taking place in and around. Hearing protection becomes an issue. And again, we know how to protect workers with hearing protection, but when we put an earplug, a standard passive earplug in an ear, or we put earmuffs over a person's ears, we in turn reduce the ability for them to communicate. They start to lose situational awareness or have the potential to lose situational awareness. And so we need to potentially think about how do we improve communications without interfering with the act of protecting their hearing. And of course, confined spaces. So many vessels are opened up during a turnaround and maintenance activities that oftentimes contractors are going into. But I thought one of the things that, as when I was in the safety and health role in the chem plants and responsible for the confined space and high-level rescue teams at the refinery that I worked in, any vessel that came open, I tried to get myself into because I wanted to see what it was going to like, what it was like in that. Because you can only look at drawings so much and say that's how I'm going to do things. But to actually get in there, having the rescue teams getting in there, taking a look at how it's designed inside, is there actually anchor points that they can use to rescue people? Kind of gives you a better impression. And even engineers like to get inside those spaces again to see what kind of damage is being done, what kind of wear and tear on the equipment, to better understand how to make the process work better. Next slide. So the types of chemical hazards encountered during the turnaround and maintenance activity will depend upon the contents and the process streams and vessels in the work area. The extent of exposure will depend on the amount of chemicals of concern, physical properties, and the length of time exposed. Workers may encounter solvents, acids, caustic, and hydrocarbons, which is very typical. Key chemicals of concern include aromatic hydrocarbons like benzene, acids like hydrofluoric acid, which I unfortunately got burnt with at one time in my career, and gases like hydrogen sulfide are all encountered. Some areas may also have metal fume concerns when welding, and again, when you're doing any type of grinding and stuff like that, when you're doing, you might have that exposure to dust and silica as well. So in line breaking, so some of kind of the key specific things, line breaking, you know, here we're looking at benzene, toluene, xylene, hydrogen sulfide, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen fluoride, are just some of the chemicals that may be found. And again, the type of respiratory protection is going to vary based on what the exposure level is. And sometimes we don't know what that is until the line is opened. And sometimes this line breaking is done hot. So sometimes we're going to need to put people into the highest level of protection, so SCBAs or airline systems, in order to make that line break, but then be able to downgrade them later when the work is being done. And some of the challenges when it comes to that, having high level of respiratory protection and then downgrading, is sometimes we don't communicate really well with our either the contractors or with our own employees of why we went from this extreme to a lower level of extremity. And so again, communication is going to be critical to make sure we do that. On surface preparation, airborne particulate hazards from blasting. And again, blasting could be to carbon dioxide, or it could be from sand or silica-based material. So again, both of those creating individual unique challenges, because the type of respiratory protection you're going to protect somebody from when you're doing a carbon dioxide or CO2 pellets versus what you're going to do for silica blasting is completely different. But again, creates challenge. And then of course the noise generated from those operations becomes an issue. So how do you protect the workers with the noise and the respiratory and still be able to communicate and work with one another really well? So super duper challenges that I think 3M has some pretty good solutions for. And of course, welding, having auto darkening lenses and stuff is important. And then confined spaces. Again, one of the areas that I'm super duper passionate about is trying to protect those workers when we're getting them in and out of confined spaces. Generally speaking, there's not a lot of hazards, or we've eliminated most of the hazards. The rescues that I've done out of confined spaces have more often been, the majority of them have been individual injuries within that or some type of medical condition. And we've got to be prepared for all of those. Next slide. I think when it comes to our respiratory protection, I thought it was interesting that there was a study done I can't even remember here. So there was a study done in Sweden after a turnaround. And so what it showed is that during the tasks during the turnaround, even though there were some short-term exposures, or a lot of short-term exposures, this includes some of the things we just talked about, like breaking lines, blinding, cleaning the equipment. All of those have that potential because of the process to expose those workers to benzene. Most exposure groups did not comply with, and the study found that most exposure groups did not comply with the Swedish occupational exposure levels. And when they looked at it, again, it's not super duper shocking, but because I think we increased the number of individuals that are working on their site, and they're mostly contractors, but contractors during those turnarounds had a 3 to 12 times higher benzene exposure level than normal refinery employees. So again, a lot of it has to do with who's actually doing the work. However, is it also a matter of, I think those are the things that we need to question ourselves is, are we providing our contractors with enough information about the potential exposures that they may be exposed to during the process of working in our facilities during a turnaround? Next slide. So again, we're safety and health professionals more than likely attending this session. I'm not sure exactly. We know that not all respirators work exactly the same, but sometimes the gap is that our employees don't understand the differences. Even again, I didn't mention, but I'm also a paramedic and firefighter. And I mean, simple things of walked into a hospital the other day. Sorry for sharing the story, but walked in the hospital the other day, and I had a nurse and doctor tell me that the patient that I was going to be transporting out potentially had an infectious disease that they hadn't completely diagnosed yet or figured out what it was. So the rest of my crew, I said, we need respirators. And all of my crew, for the exception of me, so 2 other individuals, went and grabbed their surgical masks. And I'm going, that's not going to cut it, everyone. I ended up using a PAPR, and I then did not turn on the ventilation systems in the back of the rig, but then I had my extra crew members all stay up front. So I was the only one that was the controlled exposure. So again, the point there is all those individuals that were on that crew knew the potential hazards. They were communicated, but they knew a little bit about respirators. They all had training on use of PAPRs and surgical masks and N95s, but in that particular case, 60% of them chose the wrong product. So again, if we leave it up to the workers themselves, they may in fact choose the wrong respirator. And so we need to provide them with enough information and enough guidance. And when we're looking at our contractors, again, We've got a lot of good people out there that have a lot of experience, but sometimes they're not necessarily aware of the immediate protection levels for those types. And of course, you know, every respirator is a little bit different. If there's eye exposures, if there's potential for splash as well, maybe we should be putting that person in a full face respirator rather than a half mask. It might be a little bit warmer, but now we don't have to wear potential goggles. We can put spectacle kits in those as well to potentially provide the ability to them to see very well, protect their eyes, protect their face, and still give them respiratory protection. And again, we're starting to see a lot of our customers going to PAPRs because with that PAPR, we can provide appropriate head protection as well as the appropriate respiratory protection based off the chemicals they're exposed to, and have to deal with these long shifts. What happens to a worker when they come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, or I should say 6 o'clock in the morning, and are working a 16-hour shift during a turnaround? What kind of facial hair growth is happening between those 16 hours of working? I would guarantee you that the level of exposure or the possibility for exposure at hour 14, 15, potentially, depending on some individuals' facial growth hair growth rates, is going to be more significant than they were at the first part of the morning. And that's if they shaved it right away. So we're starting to see a lot of our customers using PAPRs versus just a standard respirator just because of that. Again, we can't forget about airline systems, SCBAs, all those play an important part in certain parts of our turnaround. And again, the last thing I'll point out here too for sure is an emergency escape breathing device. So EEBD. So, and it's 3M has an ELSA version, what we call our ELSA. There are a lot of, and I recommend this oftentimes in confined spaces. And again, we have those, I see these a lot in wastewater treatment plants and in some refineries in that they'll have either SCBAs in cabinets, or if you can easily get out within 15 minutes, it's easier to have a device that you just turn a valve, put a bag over your head. And I know we've been told by our family long ago, at least I was, don't put a plastic bag over your head. With an emergency escape breathing apparatus, it's easier to train somebody by putting a bag over your head, turn a valve on, and now get out, rather than teaching somebody how to use an SCBA. And again, I mentioned confined spaces. Sometimes our confined spaces are really, really challenging, and you can't put a retrieval device on it. You want to do self-rescue, and an EEBD would be a great solution for that. So again, lots of opportunities, lots of different challenges when it comes to us to finding the right protection based off of respiratory hazards. But again, sometimes we need to think a little bit more beyond. And again, we can't assume, as I mentioned, we can't assume that our employees are going to truly understand how and what to use to provide protection. Next slide. All right, so, all right. The work being done in refinery turnarounds generate incredible amounts of noise. The simultaneous operations of heavy equipment, hydroblasting, grinding, pneumatic tools, and machinery creates a sustained high decibel environment that puts workers at serious risk of permanent hearing loss. Excessive noise creates critical communication breakdowns, making it difficult for the workers to hear verbal warnings, understand instructions, and respond to alarms. And then in the environment where clear communication is essential to coordinating simultaneous operations, we need to think about how to communicate. There's a lot of things when it comes to noise, and there's been a lot of situations where we have high levels of noise, but yet we still need to communicate. And sometimes hand signals aren't going to work so well. We're incorporating radios with hearing protection. Sometimes we need to put workers in dual hearing protection. All that's possible. And again, each one of these situations creates individual challenges. When somebody's focusing on welding and grinding, and there's some type of alarm going off, they need to be able to hear that. And again, simple passive hearing protection isn't always the best solution. When we head to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about this. So passive hearing protection has its play, no doubt about it, okay? Earplugs, first of all, they're cheaper. They're easier for people to use for the most part. But one of the things, and we have it in this slide here, and if you haven't heard about our ear validation system, reach out to a 3M sales rep. to learn a little bit more about it. First of all, we've seen more often while we're doing ear fit testing on workers and people that have companies that have implemented ear fit, they have found that there are a substantial amount of individuals that are wearing their hearing protection incorrectly. We show them how to do it. They do it, but yet when we have a device like ear fit validation that can actually validate and give an individual, because remember, an NRR is what the device is rated for, but that's in a perfect, ideal situation. Okay, it is not necessarily what each individual is going to get. And so one of the things that EarFit does is it gives an individual noise reduction rates, or PAR, personal attenuation rating, for those devices. So that way we know precisely how much ear protection that device is going to do. So if we're giving out a particular earplug, is it the right size earplug? Because there are some individuals that have larger ear canals versus others that have smaller. So sometimes we need to provide them with the right solution, not just with a solution, because it's not going to fit perfectly. I always said that, and I have noise-induced hearing loss, so I'm in one of the areas that I'm super duper passionate about. But when it comes to hearing protection, it is important that people know how to use the device. I don't know how many times I've seen people just stick the plugs in the ears and call it good. Earplugs hanging out of their ears halfway. It does reduce anything. And if the challenges, of course, and all of you know this, is that so oftentimes you don't immediately, you're not having an immediate deficit with the exposure to high levels of noise. You might get some ringing in your ear and stuff like that, but for the most part, we're going to see this long down the road. We're going to see this 10, 15, 20 years down the road. We're going to see this. I said, if people would bleed from their ears every time they had a noise exposure, it would get somebody's attention and they might actually wear the devices correctly. But having something like EarFit is going to help. The other challenge is, again, when it comes to earmuffs, and again, we show the hard hat version of it here. Again, having worked in a chemical plant and an oil refinery, where do my earplugs sit? They sat on my helmet, and I had them tight fitted to my hard hat. When I wanted to use them, I popped them down. They didn't have a good fit anymore because the padding were so worn, because the pressure that was being placed on the hard hat created an issue with the muffs. So if we are incorporating earmuffs as part of people's helmets, we need to occasionally take a look at those. Annually, we should be inspecting those to make sure that we don't have to replace the muff padding, because those often see a lot of damage and in a roundabout way create a memory that does not allow us to protect the workers very well. We do have situations, again, so again, these are passive. We have active opportunities, active hearing protection as well. And again, you can't see too well, but I love our in-ear solutions. And again, I'm not a salesperson, but these devices allow us to protect the hearing, so they can provide that noise reduction rating that we need, but also allows us, so again, generally keeps the noise levels below 82 decibels, however, can actually still allow for noise to come through so that you're not necessarily missing out on those alarms and communication things. And then devices like the over-the-ear, like Compro 3s, they actually intrinsically safe, but allows us to communicate with one another on its own radio system, or there's abilities to actually downlead these into a Motorola radio, Kenwood radio, and that to allow communications with radio systems as well. So we can protect our workers' hearing and still provide means for allowing communication. Next slide. All right, I talked really quick on flying objects and stuff, dropped objects and that, but during refinery turnaround, workers in confined spaces on scaffolding and aerial work platforms face serious risks from flying and falling objects and chemical splashes. In confined spaces, vessels, columns, and heat exchangers, workers are especially vulnerable to splashes and residual chemicals because of the close proximity. It is an area where it is limited means of entry and exit. It's usually your smaller spaces. So there is that possibility of that. Plus we try to do our best to clean these spaces out, but oftentimes there's residual chemicals present. When you're working off of scaffolding, again, challenges because you have all these work being done at higher levels. You have wind that can blow things, a lot more windier up there on scaffolding. So you have wind that can blow back and bring material and chemicals back into your space. Things can find their way that weren't there. So we need to protect the workers from those type of exposures. So again, as I mentioned before, use of full face respirators when they're using a respirator may be one of those options that we would not have normally thought about. Next slide. So our general standard safety glasses are critical. And again, having glasses that actually fit them properly, are comfortable to wear all day long, is going to be beneficial for the worker. Having something that has some fog resistance and stuff is important as well. When it comes to goggles, they play an important role. But again, goggles in a lot of refineries are sit on the hard hats as well. Those elastic, just like those earmuff padding, those elastic straps on the goggles also create memory. And oftentimes when you pull them down to protect your eyes, they may not necessarily hold well. Additionally, do you have the right goggles? If you have to take glasses off to put goggles on, or do you need to be able to, or do you want to have a goggle that can actually fit over glasses as well? So take into consideration all those things when we're looking at. And again, we have options and stuff like that when you're extra challenges when you're welding or grinding and stuff play an important part. And of course, then when we're talking about head, eye, and face, falling objects and stuff, we do want to make sure that we're providing our workers with the appropriate hard hats, rated for the appropriate rating. And then of course, during the refinery turnaround, when we're working up on scaffolding systems, incorporating chin straps or some type of device to actually keep the hard hat from flying off in high winds conditions is going to be important. And we're beginning to see a lot more people going with a climbing helmet style hard hat versus a full brim or front brim, just because, again, it keeps it closer to the head. It's a lot more comfortable than your traditional hard hats. Next slide. The welding arc emits UV and infrared radiation that can damage the cornea and the lens, often with a delayed onset measuring, meaning symptoms may not appear until hours after you have left the job or workers have left the job. The wrong lens shade or even a few seconds of unprotected exposure can result in days of lost vision over a career, contribute to permanent conditions like cataracts. Welding fumes are also not just simply smoke. We're very aware of that. There are complex mixtures of metal oxides, compounds, gases, whose composition changes depending upon the base metal, the filler material, and the coatings, and of course the surface preparation. So again, making sure that we have the right welding shield, and if we need to incorporate respiratory protection in that is going to be important. Next slide. Again, combining the right processes. Make sure that we have a welding filter in place. And again, auto darkening filters are really, really nice because the worker can be protected while the prep is being done throughout the whole entire weld. Incorporating respiratory protection when necessary not only helps with cooling, keeps the worker a little bit cooler, but it also provides the protection necessary based off of the chemicals that may be exposed to. And again, we can incorporate hard hat protection in these as well. In situations where there is a potential need for supplied air or breathing air systems, there are options out there as well that allows people to be on supplied air and still have the protection of while welding within the space. Next slide. All right, working at heights. It is, as a fall protection person, confined space, high level rescue guy, looking at a turnaround is super exciting just because you see all those options. Now, when working on scaffolding, generally speaking, we're doing a lot of different types of work on scaffolding, from line breaking, and of course, all those topics we talked about. We're accessing confined spaces while up at heights. We're working on aerial work platforms. Most of the work that's being done can be done off of scaffolding, and the scaffolding is built and designed to provide protection for workers from falls while they're on the platform. Oftentimes, however, workers have to reach out from that scaffolding, have to go through the rails of that scaffolding to access the workspace. And again, those create challenges. We need to make sure that the scaffolding is designed properly, that if we're going to incorporate fall protection off of that, we have that. And we have to think about how are we going to rescue somebody in the event that someone were to get injured or wood to have fallen. So how are we going to do all of that? Next slide. So having the right harness on, it starts with that right harness. And so many times we see people wearing the wrong size harness. Harnesses need to be fitted for the worker, and we need to make sure that we're getting the right sizes. We should have people try on harnesses. When it comes to harness, and again, I'll share my personal story. I wear a I wear a large jacket. I wear a medium polo. I love extra large or double X large hoodie sweatshirts. Okay. But if I were to choose a harness, and most people do, they choose their harness like they're choosing the size of their jacket. Under most circumstances, a large harness in our 3M line is too big for me. I am 175 pounds, 6 foot tall. In certain harnesses, I wear a small. In other situations, I'm wearing a medium. And again, we need to make sure that we're trying these harnesses on, or having our workers trying the harnesses on, in order to fit them in the right size. We see a lot of people, workers going away from lanyards, of course, web lanyards. And the reason for that is because the clearance, we're looking at 17 foot of fall clearance while utilizing a web-based lanyard. SRLs provide better options and arrest the fall in a lot closer distances. Likewise, having dual legs is oftentimes necessary in order to always maintain that 100% tie-up, so you're always connected while you're working through the work environment. And I especially see that in piping, in pipe racks. Now, again, I mentioned we need to think about rescue. There are devices out there. How are we going to get a worker down? And I know that during the turnaround and maintenance activities, oftentimes there are rescue teams available and on site. But again, having to make sure that our rescue teams can do things efficiently. I remember that times, man, I used to probably knew about 50 knots at one time. I know 3 or 4 now. I like devices that make things simple. I don't have to worry about tying knots, and they are out there. Mentioned fall protection for tools. We don't want to have those tools drop. Again, 200 pounds worth of force from a 10-foot drop of a 15-inch crescent wrench is significant. And so we want to protect those workers. And it's not necessarily always the drop directly below. There's been cases where equipment has fallen and deflected away and have struck somebody significantly outside of what would be considered the fall zone. And then again, all harnesses are not created equally. If you're wearing 40 pounds worth of tools, you might need a lot of padding. Where if you're going to confined space, you want it simpler. If you're doing welding and grinding at heights, you need to have a harness that can actually be protected or have a design that is immediately not going to be damaged in the event of slag coming in contact with it. So again, lots of challenges when it comes to working at heights. Next slide. Confined spaces, an area of my passion, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I could spend 3 hours alone talking about confined spaces. Confined spaces vary widely in size, shape, and configuration. Each space must be evaluated, of course, before entering, and a system must be designed for the type of work being done inside that space. Entering a horizontal entry versus a vertical entry in a confined spaces require different options. A lot of times we rely on tripods, but a tripod doesn't necessarily always provide us with the best solution when it comes to rescuing somebody from a confined space. Next slide. So when we want to choose it, and again, 3M has fall protection specialists all around the world that can help evaluate locations to determine what is the best solution potentially for entering and rescuing from a confined space. As I mentioned before, harnesses probably going to be a little bit more simplified. It's not a lot of stuff on it. I hear a lot of people that say that the confined spaces are too small to wear a harness. And I would argue with a lot of you. I've been into thousands of confined spaces, and I maybe one confined space where I would say that I've been into that I would say, yeah, that gets a little bit challenging, but I still wore the harness. But again, Davit systems, are by far your better solution. There are some devices out there now. 3M offers an option where it protects 2 people at the same time versus 1. It has the capacity to lift equipment as well as personnel. So again, talk to the fall protection specialist if you have questions. And then horizontal entry. Typically, we're using just a rope system to get people in and out of confined spaces with a horizontal entry. Provides no mechanical advantage, and it creates a challenge. So something like the pole hoist provides some great opportunities. And then having the right SRL or winch? Are you just raising and lowering somebody in the space, or do you need to provide fall protection? All critical components. And oftentimes you see during a turnaround multiple devices being used. Again, here's one of those concerns. And again, when it comes to confined space specifically, and even a lot of other devices, breathing systems, we're relying on a lot of contractors for a lot of our work. Oftentimes they're renting this equipment. And are they trained, and do they have enough information about utilizing the equipment before they start using it? So oftentimes the company drops off the equipment, the workers use it. It looks like the same one that they've used before, but it may in fact be a little bit differently. So make sure that we're working with our contractors, especially when they're renting equipment, especially like confined space equipment, to make sure that their workers understand how it's using. So that kind of concludes it. So again, lots of challenges when it comes to it. Again, I only brushed the surface when it came to the, kind of some of the basics. 3M has a lot of great solutions out there for you when it comes to providing and protecting your workers during a turnaround and maintenance. And we'd love to get out to your locations, help you out, find the right solutions for your situations. All right, Felipe, next slide, and I believe it's all yours.
Yes, it is. So we have several marketing programs that could support our end users in choosing or selecting the proper PPE. I'm not going into details here, but we have rebate programs, we have trade-in, we have sell demo programs, volume buy programs. So please reach out to your 3M local sales rep and get more information on those different promotions and programs that we have available that could make your product selection a little bit easier and more effective.
Otherwise, again, you can always reach out to a 3M sales rep or contact 3M. I'm not sure if our emails were put into the situation in the system or not. And again, 3M is you can always call the 3M helpline, and they'll get information to you as best as we possibly can.
Yeah, thank you so much, Felipe and Stephen and Jason, for facilitating the questions. It makes my job easier. They'll recording the webinar. It'll be available on demand. We'll include your contact information so anybody can reach out with additional questions. I'm also just in the chat. I'm just dropping a link to the Safepedia community. It's free to join. We get together on a monthly basis to discuss these sorts of topics. Ben is active in the community and answering questions on a daily, weekly basis for folks. So please consider joining the community. And then I also put in the link for Safety Connect 2026. 3M is title sponsor again this year, and they'll have more of their experts and sharing their knowledge in October at our event, Safety Connect 2026. So consider signing up for that as well. Want to thank you again for taking your time out of your day to join us for the presentation, and thanks again to our amazing partners, 3M, for bringing more educational content to our members. And again, we'll send out the recording on demand once it's available. So thanks again for joining, and have the great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.